I'll go ahead and start bringing folks in. All right, David, go ahead and take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Medina, and I'm the co-founder and COO of Results for America. Thanks for joining us for our 97th session, developed in collaboration with Bloomberg Philanthropies and the U.S. Conference of Mayors. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, the Local Infrastructure Hub is a national program that connects cities and towns with the resources and expert advice they need to access federal infrastructure funding in order to drive local progress, improve communities, and deliver results for residents. Through the hub, city and town leaders can access hands-on grant application training to secure funding from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act. Hands-on grant implementation workshops as well, one-on-one office hours, and actionable resources for all of you. And you can sign up to learn more about this program and all these resources at our website, localinfrastructure.org. Now, today's session is focused on protecting your infrastructure development goals from fiscal uncertainty by optimizing your grants management processes. And the impact of the federal government shutdown, in addition to many shifts in federal funding environment and landscape, highlight the importance of the grants management best practices that we will be discussing here today. But before we begin, I'm going to ask that you all complete a quick Zoom poll on your screen so we can gauge your confidence level with managing external funding streams. So please go ahead and do that right now. Okay. We have an incredible speaker joining us today to provide an overview of effective fiscal strategies that can help boost resilience, reduce administrative barriers to applying for federal grants, reduce reporting burdens, save money, and raise additional revenue. I'd now like to welcome our speaker, Matt Hansen. Matt is the Managing Director of Government Advisory Services at Witt O'Brien's, a high-impact crisis management firm that supports government leaders through mitigating risk, managing crises, directing recovery, and improving resilience. Thanks for joining us today, Matt. Over to you.
Appreciate it, David. Before we get into the session, I just want to talk about how critically important today's session is for local jurisdictions, given the confluence of changes to federal financial assistance by the current administration, but also with the current federal shutdown. Regardless if you are a red or blue jurisdiction, these are unprecedented times. And I know we throw that term around, unprecedented times, but having been in the federal financial assistance space for over 30 years, I can attest these are unprecedented times. We all have to understand the overarching goals of federal OMB in the current environment, which is to shrink the federal bureaucracy. But in order to do so, federal agency functions, levels, funds, and grants must be cut first in order to justify these corresponding personnel cuts. What I'm communicating to you is your jurisdictions and the numerous critical grant programs that you rely on are in the crossfire and will increasingly become collateral damage unless you aggressively plan and implement an effective strategy. So I wanted to put today's presentation in context that this is not just about navigating this grant program or that grant program or preserving certain infrastructure. It's really an overarching change that's happening with the federal bureaucracy using grants as a tool to implement that change. So to get started, we have been fortunate enough to work with some incredible jurisdictions across the country that do really good work. And when it comes to federal financial assistance, whether that be infrastructure, social safety net, et cetera, on paper, their jurisdictions look strong. They think they're doing a good job. They think they're checking all the boxes when it comes to grants. But in reality, they're underinvesting in grants. at least in the context of the time and energy you spend on your corresponding general fund budget and or the effort that's needed to currently navigate the ever-increasing headwinds of the federal financial assistance environment. Treating grants as windfalls creates missed wins and sharper downsides, findings, repayments, corrective action plans, lost trust with the public, et cetera. And this has only been exacerbated given the current federal financial assistance environment. What is that environment? That environment is 2-week application windows. That environment is requests to quickly revise applications. That environment is changing award criteria and allowability. These are all dynamic changes that are happening that we need to be able to respond to quickly and effectively. So on the next slide, we will diagnose the 7 root causes we see over and over again. And this could probably be a list of 25, but I tried to streamline it down to 7. These aren't character flaws. They're not indictments of local jurisdictions. It's just the reality of how most of us work. These are system design issues. And the current approach complicating all of these root causes is to be very reactionary to the executive orders, to OMB memos, to the uniform guidance updates, et cetera, that are hitting us almost on a daily basis without it understanding the larger why, the big picture. And when I began this presentation, I tried to lay out the why, that the current administration is trying to restructure, reinvent what the federal bureaucracy looks like. But in order to do so, programs, grant programs, and et cetera, need to be eliminated. As we go forward from this slide into the next, note which 2 are the most painful in your organization. I know we all struggle with some of those. So siloed org charts. I've talked about this on these presentations before, how Public Works is doing its own thing. The police department is doing its own. Fire is doing its own. We all work in silos. I've laid out some of the reasons why this just isn't practical in today's environment. But you have departments chasing notice of funding availability alone, coming up with their own templates and rule interpretations that differ. On a previous webinar, I talked about how problematic this is given the executive orders around DEIA and sanctuary cities, and now the executive order around homelessness. You can't have departments operating in silos, interpreting those executive orders and grant special conditions independently. The impact of all the siloed approaches is duplicative effort, weak policy alignment, inconsistent compliance. But most importantly, given the current environment, it's the inability to scenario plan and to strategize. Unless you have all your data in one place, everybody working collaboratively, it's really hard to come up with an effective plan for your jurisdiction. So on the next slide, governance isn't about control, it's about speed and really about consistency. So the second sort of root cause is leadership attention bias. Obviously, leadership elected or appointed are being pulled in all sorts of directions. There is a definite ticking clock when it comes to your general fund process, your fiscal year process, that doesn't always exist with grants. So the natural attention is to always focus on general fund activities, budget hearings, et cetera. Dashboards, hearings, public engagement, et cetera, they all center the general fund activities. Your calendar operates around these. Grants lacks these for the most part. They lack performance measures. They lack KPIs. What is the overall impact? That grants don't normally compete for your time or talent. We saw that change a little bit during COVID, where your top leadership individuals, were working on COVID response plan and working on spending plans for CARES Act and ARPA funding, but that's traditionally not happened with grants. The question I would ask is, why not? Is there anything more volatile right now than the direct or indirect actions by the federal government and subsequent reactions by state government on your local budgets? Whether that be tariffs, whether that be the impacts of the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill, whether that be rescission packages, grant terminations, now the federal government shutdown. The list goes on and on and on, and that is you know, not only directly but indirectly impacting your community on a daily basis. We can fix some of these things with an annual grant plan and with data analysis, and we'll talk about some of these later on in the presentation. Next slide. So one of the root causes we see quite a bit is compliance fog. Either people operating from a position of fear, or just assuming that nobody will notice, or things will just take care of itself. And what this results in is folks either avoiding opportunities, perceived to be too risky, or they sprint into things too quickly and have to fix problems later on. Findings, repayments, corrective action plans, these all burn credibility. As a recent example, or an example we're in right now, many jurisdictions sprinted through the COVID funding without considering the risk. We're going to spend the ARPA money. There's too many of us, too many recipients. We did it under revenue loss. Nobody's going to worry about it. Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but those bills haven't come due yet. Treasury is still, digging their way through CARES Act funding. They really haven't even gotten into ARPA funding yet from a monitoring and compliance perspective. They are using machine learning and AI to root out compliance issues. And there's a lot more noise we're going to hear about compliance and oversight on previous programs. But now we're in a full shutdown mode, given the perceived risk and volatility of the current environment. So those same communities that just sort of breezed through ARPA, didn't really care about compliance, are now looking at the current environment and saying, hey, wait a second, this is too risky. There's too many landmines, so we're not even going to, attempt to continue to participate. And we really need to reconcile that. You can't be one and without the other. Next slide. So decision rights, who approves match, who owns subrecipient monitoring? This really harkens back to operating within the silos, but also not having the attention of leadership when it's needed most, because they're focused on general fund and other things. The impact of this is missed opportunities, late calls about partnerships, etc. There are opportunities in the chaos that we are in right now. When you look at the top line amount of federal financial assistance available, it really has not moved drastically. It has certainly pivoted from certain sectors to others, but there are opportunities right there. But only if your jurisdiction is prepared and decisions occur efficiently and you have the attention of leadership when you need it most. Next slide. So no single source of truth. This certainly goes well beyond the world of federal financial assistance. This goes well beyond the world of infrastructure projects. We all operate in environments. We have ERP finance systems. Certain people track things on spreadsheets, emails. There's lots of rework, rekeying, reconciling weak internal controls. The impact of all of this is leaders see totals, not risk, not deadlines or evidence. And if leaders are not seeing the data they need, then the public, and equally important, the grantors and appropriators, are not seeing the necessary data. It is really critical to have the right tools, to have a single source of truth, so that both internally and externally, you're seeing what you need to make timely decisions. Next slide. Capacity is episodic. Again, pointing back to the recent COVID experience, your talent surged for, for lack of a better term, a marquee program, global public health pandemic, and record amounts of historic federal financial assistance. We stood up recovery offices. We took our best and brightest from all areas and we surged them to that project. And as COVID is now, mostly in the rearview mirror, that top talent has gone back to their day jobs, and grants and federal financial assistance is not getting the attention it once did. What the impact of this is every application, every notice of funding opportunity feels like the first time. We're always starting with a blank piece of paper. We're always trying to get team members up to speed. It goes without saying, or it should go without saying, that the same type of leadership team you put in place to navigate the COVID public health pandemic and the subsequent funding opportunities should be in place right now. It should have been in place when IIJA, IRA, and CHIPS and Science Act were first announced, but certainly should still be in place in order to navigate, the environment we're in right now with the recent legislative packages as well as the current federal shutdown. Next slide. So story gap. Dollars don't necessarily equal outcomes in the public narrative. We have to do a better job of talking about the outputs, the outcomes, why these programs matter, why grants matter, that they're not just a nice to have or another duty is assigned. But we really need to highlight how impactful they are for all of our communities. When a grant program has low visibility, it has low support. When grants as a whole have low visibility, they have low support. It is an absolute truth that programs that demonstrate successful outcomes and have garnered widespread stakeholder support find a way to survive. And we have seen this historically with criminal justice programs and other programs that have really garnered widespread stakeholder support. I think a good example right now is everybody on this call would probably agree that the BRIC program is an incredibly valuable program, one that we hate to see that it's potentially going to be eliminated or certainly being disrupted. But have we all done a good enough job to actually talk about the outcomes, talk about the successes, garner wide range support outside of just the resiliency disaster recovery field? The BRIC is a program that really highlights or illustrates how important being able to talk about outcomes and outputs and having wide ranging support would be impactful right now in the environment we're in. So the fix, I'm always full of lots of problems, and hopefully I'm able to provide some solutions. So run your federal assistance like an enterprise portfolio. Run it like you do anything else in your jurisdiction. Grants as other duty is assigned, those days are really behind us. So 4 high-level moves. Having organizational governance, regardless of the size of your jurisdiction. This isn't just a strategy for large municipalities. Every city and town should follow this. Have an annual grant plan. Know what you're trying to accomplish with grants. Have data and delivery methodologies, but then also have cash and compliance discipline. Certainly, right now with a federal shutdown, you shouldn't be getting too far in front of getting reimbursed for grant programs. As long as payment systems are still up and running, you should be going almost daily requesting drawdown requests for your grants. And just because your federal grantor or grant manager is furloughed or is under a gag order, not returning calls, whatever the case might be, you have to maintain compliance discipline. You need to be, checking all the boxes, crossing all the T's, dotting all the I's. as we stay on that slide for just a couple minutes more. So as we dive into this, you know, maintain your local community values, but align your grant strategy with the fundamentals of current state and federal administration. So I know there's a lot of discussion right now around things like DIA or safety supports for the homeless population, and jurisdictions are feeling very much like they just have to, change the words they're using, pivot in completely, different directions. I would argue that, you need to maintain your local values. But in saying that, you then need to align your grant strategy, with the fundamentals of the current grantors. How you do this is, let's say, homelessness. You also need to be talking about job training and apprenticeship and uh, uh, recidivism prevention, and you can still have a holistic local approach on addressing homelessness, but not just completely have to pivot in a different direction because the executive order. Get ahead of appropriations bills and notices of funding opportunity. What we're seeing right now is we're seeing, 2-week turnarounds for grant application periods. If you don't start working on a grant application or a project design until that notice of funding availability hits the street, you're never going to be successful. Your community's needs and projects are what they are, regardless if there's a current grant opportunity out there. So really encourage you to get ahead of, writing one-pagers, writing executive summaries, putting templated grant applications together, anything you can do to get ahead of the current timeline. In today's climate, the safest and smartest way to protect programs is to make them about what they deliver, not about who they're perceived to be for. So this is in response to the attacks on DEIA and others. That does not mean you abandon equity. It does not mean you abandon your local values. It means leading with outcomes and outputs that are provable, compliant, and durable across political shifts. Focus on what you're trying to accomplish, whether that be addressing food deserts or reconnecting communities or first generation, college graduates or whatever else. Really focus on the what, the outcomes, the outputs, and not so much on the people. The people you can address with your local values and how you actually implement the projects long term. Next slide. So running really quickly, establish governance, have a grants user group, have it led by a key leader, a chief financial officer, accounting officer, etc. Publish a grants manual, build a continuity toolkit. These are all things that we've talked about again and again and again, and they're critically important that you are doing this to seize on opportunities, but also navigate the waters we're in right now. Why this works: clear lanes, faster escalation of issues, durability across administrations, so having programs and initiatives that are sustainable. You don't necessarily need a centralized approach, but certainly a coordinated approach to grants management. Next slide. So build an annual grant plan. Have 3 to 5 themes, have a 12 to 15 month calendar, et cetera, et cetera. The way municipal budgeting usually works is, the focus is on the general fund, the annual fiscal year budget. That's a 12-month budget. And then after that budget's in place, we identify where there are gaps, where programs and projects didn't get funded, and we say, go find a grant. Well, grants don't work on the same 12-month cycle. Grants usually work on an 18-month cycle. So you really need to get ahead of your general fund budget with a grant plan, or at least be doing them on a parallel basis. Don't try and be all inclusive, but pick 2 or 3 or 5 really critically important issues to your community, whether that be infrastructure, whether that be various social safety net programs, and have a strategy around it. One of the outcomes is you'll have fewer but much stronger applications. And most of the content, 70 to 80% of the content that you will ultimately need for grant applications will be pre-built and sitting in your annual grant plan as you move forward. Next slide. Stand-up data and delivery, again, goes way beyond just grants, but pick a system of record. Are you going to use a grants management system? I see quite a few people in the chat referencing eCivis and Una and some other products. Whether you're going to be using the data repository, the budgeting module within your enterprise financial system for grants, whether you have a document repository, Power BI, pick one, standardize the data, launch a public dashboard that talks about your pipeline, deadlines, draws. Right now, it should be talking about the risk. What programs are in jeopardy, what programs are paused, which ones are terminated, which ones in the draft budgets look like they might see reductions. Or if we operate under a omnibus appropriation for all of next year, what does steady state funding mean for some of these programs? The outcome is one source of truth, timely and accurate data, and hopefully that should lead to leadership attention rising as they're seeing real, timely, and actionable data. Next slide. Operate with cash and compliance discipline. Again, I talked about this earlier on. I can't say this enough, given that we are in the middle of a federal shutdown. To date, payment systems are still up. Folks should be going in on a daily basis, requesting reimbursement, making sure those deposits hit their accounts, trying to navigate grants without requesting any changes that might require human involvement in order to keep the pipeline of funding going. And this goes the same with compliance discipline. Things we talk about in the grants world that I don't know necessarily translate to city government as a whole are things like risk-based subrecipient monitoring, corrective action plan closure, closeout readiness, etc. These are all critically important things to make sure your community stays in compliance and does not wind up on a federal suspension or debarment list. And we are seeing the current administration use the federal suspension and debarment list more and more as a way of excluding communities from receiving funding. And we just saw this recently with the threat to Harvard University. As they were going into negotiations, they were actually referred for potential listing on the suspension and bar list. Building capacity within your organization and amongst the various non-government organizations that you partner with is one of the most important things you can do to promote equity in your community. At the end of the day, these are the change makers, the boots on the ground that are going to serve on your community. So when you think about how do we promote DEIA, how do we promote equity, think about it a little bit differently. Think about the capacity you can build not only internally with your staff, but also with your NGOs to help the community as a whole. Next slide. So as a grant professional, I oftentimes feel like a used car salesman. I'm constantly trying to sell somebody the good old reliable Buick that they don't want. But here are some of the common objectives we hear. We can't add staff. Well, we're not necessarily asking you to add staff. We're asking you to, centralize activities in order to, develop templates, evidence, reporting cadence, invest in making the process more efficient, not adding staff. Departments want autonomy. What we're not, when we talk about hybrid approaches or centralized approaches to grants management, we're not talking about telling individual departments how they can spend their money. We're talking about how we comply. We're talking about how we can do scenario planning, how we can strategize, At the end of the day, departments own what to pursue, own how they spend funding within the confines of the individual grant program. We hear this time and time again. Our enterprise financial system already does this. The ERPs track dollars. Grants need life cycle, they need evidence, they need data, they need outcomes. Those are not things that traditionally your ERP accounting systems do unless they have a performance management module built on. Compliance slows this down. I'm sorry, given the current environment with the current administration, if you're not maintaining compliance, you're giving them excuses to terminate your grants and to potentially impact future funding for your organization. And then we'll lose momentum with leadership changes. Processes, systems, staff capacity, these are all things to actually help transition from one leadership to another. Is when institutional memory walks out the door. That's when these systems change administration to administration. So what does equal energy look like? These are some example performance measures. Early submissions, win rate by theme, spending plans, on-time reporting. These are all types of performance measures that we would have for general fund budget, general fund activities. We don't historically do that for grant programs. We, for the most part, don't do this, making this type of data available to the public or make this type of data available to our elected leaders. And it's really critical that we do so right now. Next slide. So just as we, there's a question about pre-baked memos and templates, collateral, having, each time you do a risk assessment, each time you do monitoring, each time you do a sole source procurement, you're not starting from scratch, that these memos already exist, the templates already exist for staff to use. So a realistic 90-day approach, 0 to 30 days, put your governance model in place. 31 to 60 days, stand up your Power BI, your data analytics, go through various training sprints. And then the last 61 to 90 days, monitor progress, integrate into your overall processes, have a scorecard. The reality is, short of another public health pandemic like COVID, a global military conflict, some sort of domestic terrorist attack, etc., the federal financial assistance environment that we're in right now is not changing in the next 3 years. And if one of these horrific events were to occur, the federal response, as we've seen in the past, would be some sort of recovery funding, which would require the same structures to exist. So this is not wasted effort. This is absolutely where your time and energy needs to be spent in order to navigate where we are right now and where we're going over the next 3 years. So days 0 to 30, appoint somebody. If you don't have a grant administrator, appoint somebody to coordinate the overall grant operations, charter a users group of some sort, look to develop a grant management manual, look to develop your version 1 at least of your grant plan, start looking at your what data you have, what data you might need, how you can navigate procurement, etc. And for leadership transitions, it's not only your own local leadership, but also if other local, state, or federal leaders are going to transition. How do we need to pivot to work successfully with a new governor? How do we need to pivot to work successfully with a new county administrator that neighbors our city? Don't just think of internal leadership transitions, but think of those other leadership transitions. I believe there are 36 gubernatorial elections next year. So there's certainly going to be changes at the state level that are going to complicate matters just as much as the changes we're seeing at the federal level. So think big picture when it comes to how you navigate leadership transitions. Next slide. So days 31 through 60, whatever your data analytics looks like, Power BI, Tableau, a simple website, get that page live, start greater engagement with your citizens, greater engagement with stakeholders. There's some really wonderful tools out there like Invisio and Polko and others that make it easier to engage the public. In your dashboard, load awards, deadlines, even if the federal government has not announced when a NOFO is going to come out or a deadline, look at past years, and pre-populate them based on what's happened in the past. Start putting together program and grant readiness kits and start doing training for staff, both internally and external. For all of these things, I strongly encourage you to include as wide a variety of internal stakeholders as possible, but external stakeholders. Really, if it's infrastructure, pull in private sector. If it's social safety net, pull in NGOs. Your city, your community cannot do this without those community partners. Days 61 to 90. Is really about refinement, is really about going operational. The current administration is just looking for jurisdictions to trip up as another method of justifying grant terminations. They're using machine learning and AI to scrape reports, submitted reports, local news reports, and any other publicly available information. Turn this from a negative into a positive by proactively addressing compliance concerns and publishing outcomes and impacts. The more positive news you put out, the more outcomes, the outputs, the better it's going to be. But we know for a fact that this administration is scrubbing local news reports, looking for I gotcha moments, and then using OMB, OIG, and others to go after entities because of these trip ups that occur. Next slide. So the payoff, I know, the federal financial assistance environment does not look very pleasing right now, does not look very opportune. But trust me when I say, there are opportunities in the chaos. We have seen this time and time again. We saw this after the housing crisis over a decade ago with ARA, and we're certainly there now. The payoff for implementing some of these strategies would be more wins, fewer last-minute scrambles, cleaner audits, visible resident impact, and resilience across administrations, whether that be local administrations, state administrations, or the current presidential administration. Again, securing opportunities out of the chaos. Last slide. So in closing, grants will continue to stay in the shadows without governance, plan, data, delivery. I really appreciate all the effort that Results for America, U.S. Conference of Mayors, Bloomberg, and others have done to pull grants out of the shadows with these webinars and the local infrastructure hub. It is so critically important, and it is such a huge part of the direct and indirect budget of local communities that it really garners this level of importance. Not understanding the big picture, continue to be defensive and reactionary are all losing strategies. It is what it is. We need to understand, what is happening, what the administration is trying to accommodate, and use that information as an empowerment tool to help us better navigate the process collectively as a sector, local government sector, but then individually with our local communities. Treat federal assistance like your second operating budget. I'm sure that tagline doesn't resonate with everyone, but there are things that local communities just cannot do from an operational perspective without grant assistance, whether that be direct federal assistance, whether those be pass-through dollars, through state, whether that be philanthropic or other sources of funding, or whether it be the indirect, social safety net programs that are getting so much attention right now, like Medicaid and Medicare, SNAP, et cetera, et cetera. These grant programs, pay for infrastructure projects, they pay for staff, they pay for all sorts of critical services that we need to deliver in our local community and really need to be given that same level of attention. With that, I will hand it over and see if we have some questions.
Great, Matt. Thanks so much. We do have several questions, and as I've been saying in the chat, this next 20 minutes is really all for you all. So we want to answer whatever's on your mind, whether it was something Matt covered today or there's something adjacent. Feel free, if it's easier not to put it in the chat, to just raise your hand. We can call on you, and you can walk us through what your community is struggling with or thinking about. And Miranda just posted in the chat the link. We've often found that when we ask you all if we can help you, the way to engage folks is to get you to sign up right now. So we have a link in the chat to office hours. If there's something, we're trying to figure out how to move from a really, divorce process where every agency is keeping its own spreadsheet to something more centralized. And we could really use some time and guidance with Matt or any of his colleagues to help think through that. Sign up and we can help you there. Or, my community was one of the ones that's grants have just been terminated, or, X percentage of our budget relies on the feds and that's at risk. We're trying to figure out how to scenario plan. Those are the kinds of things that we'd love to have, give you some advice on. So I'm going to first turn to the questions we did get in the chat. The first was about an annual grant plan. Matt, you talked about it a few times. What does that look like, and how do you go about, taking the first steps towards creating that?
So, many communities are familiar with, having a capital improvement plan. These are, multi-year documents that you work on with, stakeholder engagement and prioritizing infrastructure projects. The annual grant plan would, take something like a CIP plan or other and turn it into actionable bites. So in the current year of the CIP plan, we're anticipating replacing the community center, doing the sidewalks, doing this, doing that. Well, how are you planning on doing that? Well, certainly one of the strategy is with CIP funds that have been budgeted. It might be bond issuance, it might be tax credits, it might be general fund. But part of that is grants and identifying which grants you would target in a particular year to accomplish which goals. You would do this, whether the priorities for the community are, and as I said earlier, pick 2 to 3, pick 3 to 5, whatever it is. So this year we want to prioritize infrastructure, we want to prioritize housing, we want to prioritize early childhood education. Define what that means, that you want to prioritize those, what you want to try to accomplish, and then transition that into an actionable plan to go after particular grant programs and resource it appropriately. And these are all the things you spell out in the annual grant plans. They can't just be philosophical, like if a grant comes our way, we will take advantage of it. You actually have to resource it. Are we going to write the grant application ourselves? Are we going to contract it out? Which partners are going to work together? Do we have money set aside for a match? It's all the details that you put in into this annual grant plan, and then you measure your progress against performance on that annual grant plan. It really, helps to drive the conversation, not only with your elected leadership, but then internally within departments. And there's no confusion about roles and responsibilities. You don't get, the day of a notice of funding availability being released and suddenly scrambling to pull together a meeting saying who can help with this. The roles and responsibilities are already outlined in the grant plan, who's going to do what, where match contributions are going to come from, et cetera, et cetera.
And now I'm going to ask maybe the harder question. Have you seen examples of great grant plans, and is that something we might be able to share with folks?
I have, and Jamie, I'll remind me and I'll get you some samples. I would tell you my own personal experience. Uh, it was kind of a baby step towards having a grant plan was uh, when I was a municipal grants administrator, I sat in the cubicle next door to the CIP manager. And I would look at, all the grant programs that were forecasted for the year. And I would just yell over the cubicle and say, hey, do you have a project for sidewalks? Do you have a project for housing? And it was, very much the origins of having that grant plan and having that connective tissue between not just the CIP plan, but all the various, strategic plans that local governments have that more times than not sit on a shelf and collect dust versus actually having strategies put to them to actually put them in action.
That's great. And we'll share with everyone too. Mayor Shore in a recent webinar talked about the way he's approached this and thinking about having a list of opportunities sort of ready so that when those funding opportunities come up, you already know what you're going to go after and how you're going to do that. And sounds like Matt and his colleague took the childhood game of Go Fish and took it to the next level. The next question we got was about tools and the sort of the sprawl that can happen when lots of different folks are keeping track of these on different spreadsheets. We heard before there's a lot of software platforms out there. Matt, could you just talk about sort of the pros and maybe cons of different platforms? And my my thought here is that no platform is going to fix what might not be something where you don't have the systems and the team in place.
Implementing GovTech solutions is really a three-legged stool, with the IT solution being a singular leg of that stool. The other two are policies, procedures, internal controls, and the third leg being staff, having staff that has capacity, having staff that has training, having a change management strategy in place. If you don't have all three of those, it doesn't matter how much money you spend on GovTech solutions, it's going to fail. And we see this time and time again. We as a company historically have been software agnostic. I don't care if you have the best Excel spreadsheet known to man. If people don't know the policies and procedures that go along with the utilization of that spreadsheet, and there's not adherence by staff to keep it updated, it's going to fail. And the same thing would happen with buying the best in breed ERP financial system. So really focus on the problem you're trying to solve. Is it internal tracking? Is it communicating to the public? Is it the financial side of grants? You're trying to speed up payments, you're trying to get reimbursed more quickly, or the programmatic side of grants, you're trying to manage performance. But then make sure you're paying attention to all three legs of the stool. Make sure you have living, breathing policies and procedures. Make sure you have staff that are trained and are adhering to the utilization, and then make sure you have a solution that's actually addressing the problem you're trying to fix.
That's great. We have two questions that I think cover adjacent topics. So one is how to convince departments to do early planning to coordinate match funds, and then sort of a related question is how to deal with this chicken and egg problem. Some people want to wait till you get the grant to line up the capital match or other local capital funding, but obviously sometimes that's too late in the process. So how would you think about how to coordinate these, how to get everyone on board with doing the early solicitation?
So, as a career grant professional, for the life of me, I just don't understand why, every department doesn't want to drop everything and come talk grants with me. I mean, for 30 years, I haven't understood that, but I get it. They have day jobs, they're focusing on other things. The best advice I have for breaking down the silos is, again, about having a plan, having data, having metrics, having KPIs. So with our version 1 of our grant plan, which was yelling over a cubicle, when that got more mature and it identified targets by sector. So we think we can bring in X amount of money for the fire department, X amount of money for the police department. In order to do this, these are the enablers. We're going to need staff resources to write applications, staff resources to manage grants, matching dollars, whether those are cash or in kind. Those were memorialized in the annual grant plan and also memorialized in KPIs. The more all this information got out into the public domain, it was shared with appointed leadership. It was also shared with elected leadership. And there gets to be a certain amount of accountability. So I actually had city council members who would, pull an agency director aside and say, hey, I see that you guys aren't submitting applications, or you all, haven't contributed, whatever, and hold them accountable. And so it less and less, was it my responsibility to try and convince somebody to do something. There was just a general environment of accountability. The other thing I think works is when you bring tools and resources to those departments. So one of the things I really saw as my responsibility as a grant administrator was to bring policies and procedures and collateral and grant managers manuals and training and all those things to really be a partner, which also helped to break down the silo, and thus having arguments over match contributions got to be fewer and fewer. As far as the chicken and the egg problem go, a year ago, I'd say that was a problem. We had lots of advance notice about grant programs that were going to be released. There was lots of news releases and public meetings, and then when notices of funding availability were actually open, they were open for 90 days, 120 days. We worked with local federal field offices to help us complete applications and get them across the finish line. That's no longer the environment. You cannot wait. You need to be, your projects are your projects, your needs are your needs. Write them up as if a grant application is open already. Mature them to the point, they might have to sit on the shelf for a little while, collect a little dust while you wait for the proper funding opportunity. But you cannot wait. You have to get ahead of this. I mean, if you haven't been tracking the news, it's been program after program, agency after agency that have opened with 2-week turnaround deadlines on applications. And that's just not enough time. So you have to have, partially built applications. If you think about having to do preliminary environmental reviews or having to do a BCA, a cost benefit analysis type, you just cannot do these things in 2 weeks. And they are critical parts of many grant programs, including the large infrastructure projects. So you have to have skin in the game. You have to make some local investment. You have to get ahead of the curve and be ready to pounce on these opportunities when they come along.
Thank you so much, Matt. I think you'll find lots of words of comfort in your advice. And just want to remind everyone, we will be sharing the slides. Also, Matt's working on a great resource that sort of synthesizes a lot of this content that you can take and build that consensus across your teams. And I really think maybe it's because we care a lot about leadership development. This is a moment to go to your mayor or your city manager and really say to them and express the case for making this as important as you think about tax revenue, because in a lot of jurisdictions, you're getting a lot of your money from outside sources, and so it should be treated with as much concern. And then I think we're running maybe at our last question. One of the questions, and I think you might have to be able to iterate on this one. is talking about ways to anticipate or predict NOFOs in order to form a 12 to 18-month grant plan. You just talked about the landscape is changing, right? We all recognize that. I think there will be opportunities coming out, but I think we're thinking about a wider pool of funding now and different ways if you have priority projects. And so maybe just iterating on that question a little bit, if you can think about and maybe provide some advice on how to get that 12 to 18-month horizon.
Yeah, I mean, I think without folks going out and investing in grants management solutions or AI tools or whatever else, grants.gov is a great place to go and look at the actuals over the last 12 to 18 months. And then once you have that listing, you can then go through and look at some of the legislative packages to see which programs have already been named that they're going to be eliminated or they're going to be curtailed. And you start to put a straw man together pretty quickly of what it might look going forward. One of the things that we were discussing while we were waiting for this call to start is, a lot of the federal agencies that are remaining open right now, they're remaining open using Inflation Reduction Act as sort of lights on operational funding. That is not by accident. That is very much, intentional by the current administration. But what that means is if you're sitting there waiting for, a bunch of Inflation Reduction Act programs to be released, it's probably not going to happen. This is not, this scenario planning, this strategy is not something right now that you can do part-time. You need to be digging into the One Big Beautiful Bill. You need to be digging into, the OMB director's talking points. The news today is about, potentially federal employees not getting back pay coming out of a shutdown, which is really kind of unprecedented. You need to be tracking all these things, to be looking for tips and clues in order to be able to navigate going forward, but also to identify where the opportunities are going to be going forward. And this is probably something, a conversation to have with your leadership about how you need to get organized, be more strategic, or you're just going to be falling farther and farther behind your peer jurisdictions.
Great. No, thank you again, Matt. Thanks to everyone who's been with us today. Before we end our session, we'd like to ask you all to fill out a second very quick Zoom poll. These help us put together the webinars like this in the future. And as you're doing so, I'd like to highlight another no-cost technical assistance opportunity backed by Bloomberg Philanthropies and led by the National League of Cities. The Hub provides free trainings and resources to help cities at every level of experience develop competitive applications for federal infrastructure funding. Our upcoming free Brownfields workshop will be an intensive half-day experience designed to provide targeted grant-specific training to help you secure funding. The workshop will take place on October 9th, so that's this Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. You can register for this session using the link in the chat or the QR code that you can find on your screen. And finally, please, again, check out our website for all of these resources, localinfrastructure.org. And we thank you again for joining us.